You're listening to the Nutrition Experts Podcast, featuring guests who take the scientific talk about food and break it down for practical use. You've heard the phrase, "You are what you eat." Come find out what that really means. Experience conversations with experts in the field of nutrition and understand the power of food for our health, well-being, and beyond. Now, here's your host, registered dietitian and nutritionist, Mathea Ford.
Hi there, it's Mathea. Welcome back to the Nutrition Experts Podcast, the podcast featuring nutrition experts who are leading the way using food starts today, right now, with our next guest. It's great to have Jenna Drew on the show today. Jenna, welcome to Nutrition Experts. I'm excited to have you on the show and share your expertise with my tribe.
Hi, Mathea. I'm super excited to be here, and I can't wait to share this message with them too.
We were talking, and you live on a farm now. What kind of motivated you to start homesteading and work with bees?
Yeah, so we have lived in the concrete jungle of New York City for about the last 8 years, and we just kind of got sick of just seeing concrete everywhere and not having nature surrounding us besides a park. So we made the move to, they call it upstate New York, and now we have over 20 acres. We have 20 different raised bed gardens that are getting started. Inside the gardens, we actually have 8 different hives of bees. And I don't know if you know this, but there's actually in each hive about 50 to 65,000 bees in each one. So that means we have almost 500,000 bees, which is crazy, on our property now. And we're getting chickens for their eggs. And really, we were looking for a better quality of life. Now that we have a little one, we've got a little girl who's going to be 2 this summer. And we're expecting our second little girl coming this summer too. So we wanted them to have a different lifestyle and have access to the foods that they're going to be eating through actually growing their own food. So we're really excited to kind of instill this value and this love for whole foods into our little ones.
So are you going to use the bees to make honey and also obviously to pollinate your gardens? Is any sort of other reason that you have the bees or just for that?
Exactly. So we're using them for the pollination. Since we have fruit trees, most of the time you need to use some kind of chemical process to help them pollinate. So this gets rid of that. So we have, that all natural, back to nature pollinator with the bees when it comes to the fruit trees, as well as the flowers and even the herbs and vegetables. So that really just brings us back another step to nature with the bees. And they're kind of fun to learn about. We have somebody that's kind of teaching us what to do and when to do it with them, so we can really get the best honey coming this fall.
I've heard that local honey is really great for helping with like allergies or any sort of just to help your body, because they do get that pollen from local area and then make the honey, and then therefore you're kind of getting exposed to that.
Exactly. So the bees, they're out there pollinating what's around you, what's on your property or different miles around it. So it's helping you support your own immune system with what's being grown locally. So you can kind of fight back another way when it comes to those seasonal allergies, when everything starts blossoming and pollinating and just starting to look beautiful. Unfortunately, some people, it creates that seasonal allergy time, which is not fun for anybody that has to deal with it. So it's just that extra boost you can give yourself locally.
Great. So Jenna, what made you interested in those topics or that area?
Really, this started from my own health issues. I was about 21 years old and I had just graduated college. I was starting to develop a lot of different ailments that weren't of issues before. I had been diagnosed with asthma, and I had always been very active. I played sports, I ran track, and I never had respiratory issues until my kind of early 20s. And that was sort of a red flag for me. I started getting these heart palpitations in the middle of the night where I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I'd feel like I was having a heart attack because my heart was beating so hard out of my chest, and it would happen out of nowhere. And then I kind of started getting this cyst-like acne that would form at the base of my chin, and it would be so painful that I'd actually have to go into my dermatologist and I'd have to have him drain this. Anytime I touched it or put makeup on, it was so inflamed and irritated and painful. And then I started getting belly bloat, and I was having a lot of issues with focus and concentration, especially at my job. And since I was newly graduated from college, this was one of my first jobs, and I was so afraid of not being productive and getting fired and knowing that my boss had to notice this kind of days I would get into in the afternoons and a brain fog that I would have. But what really made me pay attention is going to the doctor, and I would tell him what was going on. And the one day he said, well, could you possibly have some kind of depression? Is that a possibility? What are your thoughts on that? And Mathea, whenever he said that, it was like somebody slammed me with a train. I just stopped dead in my tracks because I had always felt like I was very positive, very optimistic, very outgoing. I was always the happiest person in the room. And to hear him say, well, Jenna, you might have some kind of depression, I knew that was my wake-up call, where something had to change and something wasn't right in my system. Luckily, I had been introduced to a woman who had written a cookbook that was all about living gluten-free and allergen-free, and it was because her daughter had celiac disease. When I made that connection, and of course, I went to see some doctors to get the diagnosis, but I realized how it all relates back to foods and how whatever we put into our body really either makes us thrive or it makes us feel sluggish and bloated and gross, right? So I went and I got some training, and mainly because I am a super nerd. I will totally lay that out there and admit to it. I actually have my master's in library science, so I'm not sure how much nerdier you can get than that. But I started doing research, and I got trained as a mind-body fitness coach, and not really because I had ever foreseen working with clients yet, but actually mainly because I wanted to figure out for myself how the foods I was eating were affecting my mind and were affecting my body. And then, fast forward throughout the years, I started using natural remedies like essential oils. I started eating whole foods and seasonally cleansing and getting certified as a health coach. And eventually, I decided it was time to jump into this and start sharing all of this knowledge that I had kind of collected and created resources for over the years, because it was just for my personal use and my family and making us healthier, right? So it got to the point where I couldn't help but start sharing. And that's kind of where I am now.
You got diagnosed, obviously you had blood tests, they verify that you have celiac allergy, and then you just went about with the background that you had, having experienced someone who was writing a book about celiac or recipes for gluten-free. How did you go about the change?
Even though I knew a lot about gluten-free, it was pretty dramatic because I had been somebody that never really paid attention to ingredient list or, what was actually in the foods I was eating. I just cared about how they tasted. And at that point, since I was a lot younger, it was about how quickly they could be made. Whenever I started to actually pay attention to food labels, I would remember spending hours still at the grocery store and looking at the ingredient labels and starting to try to decipher what some of those words are that you can't even pronounce underneath the ingredient list. And I would actually remember calling companies while I'm at the grocery store and talking to their representatives and figuring out if there was any gluten in these foods, because back then they actually didn't have to list the top allergens. Like now they have to list wheat and dairy and soy and eggs and peanuts, and they didn't have to do that before. So now it's a lot easier, but it's still quite a transition and learning curve. But I had to learn how to cook for myself and make these real foods. And it got to the point where I started developing this goal of just eating around the perimeter of the grocery store, because then I didn't have to worry about what was really in the foods, because it was all fresh produce, it was fresh poultry and meats and fish and eggs. And I didn't have to really spend all that time looking up every single ingredient. Plus, it was a lot healthier for me.
I've seen where as gluten-free has become more of a popular diet, not necessarily related to having been diagnosed with a condition, but more people's desire to do gluten-free, whatever their personal motivation is for that. There's more processed foods that are now gluten-free. So how do those fit into a gluten-free diet, or how do you incorporate those, or do you? What do you do? How do you feel about that?
Personally, I think that a cupcake is a cupcake no matter if it's gluten-free or not. And that being said, as somebody that's first diagnosed with celiac disease or gluten sensitivity, chances are there's a lot of inflammation that's happening in the gut and a lot of damage that's been done. So when you're first diagnosed, I always like to lead clients into this real food diet to help heal that gut, because you need to heal it for you to start feeling better. And that's hard to do when you're still eating a lot of processed foods, because even though they are gluten-free, it doesn't necessarily mean it's healthier. There's there's still sugars in there. There's still different carbs. There's a lot of ingredients that may not be as healthy for you as you need, especially after you may have gone through a lot of health issues from your gut. So really it's back to the basics at the beginning and eating those real foods that are going to nourish you. You're going to get the nutrients that you need, because when you do have damage in your gut, the villi, which are, they're those little hairs that are in the lining of your intestines that basically pull the nutrients from your foods to help you digest it. Those are all damaged. So basically, when you're first getting started on a gluten-free diet, you're going through this major healing curve and you're going to start to feel better. Those villi might not be quite healed yet. It can take a lot of time to heal those. So starting right away with processed foods, you're not going to be able to get as many nutrients from those foods as you would, the fresh or seasonal produce or those real foods that provide most of your nourishment.
Do you see a lot of value in foods that are like probiotics or prebiotics type things to help with that gut healing, or to just maintain that gut once you get back to that baseline, I guess you would call it, after you've removed the gluten and you've stopped the inflammation?
Absolutely. I think those healing foods, whether it's drinking kombucha or kefir or any probiotic infused foods, taking a probiotic that has been researched to make sure, because the number one thing with most probiotics is the bacteria gets released before it's supposed to in your intestines. So you want to make sure you're getting a good probiotic that's releasing it where you need it. And that is so important, in my opinion, for everybody to be taking a probiotic, but especially if you need support in your gut, and especially if you have gluten sensitivity or celiac, because our damage is all in the gut. And since that happens, we produce less digestive enzymes and less bile, which again helps us digest our foods. And you can get all that support from a probiotic. So really, with celiac, you're hit from both ends with the damage to the gut. So you're not digesting your foods, you're not getting the nutrients. So when you add in that probiotic, it's just like adding millions of other little fighters in your gut to help do the work for you.
If you're starting to see some of these things, are there some things that we can do? Because they're not always going to be celiac, but they could be affected by the food that you eat.
Absolutely. So when it comes to these symptoms coming up, and there's actually over 300 different symptoms of gluten sensitivity and celiac disease. So it can be really hard to diagnose. the average is actually about 8 years for somebody to be diagnosed properly with celiac disease, because it can come up similar to IBS or Crohn's or colitis or other digestive issues too, especially if those are your main symptoms. And it can be hard for doctors to diagnose. So, you want to start keeping track of the foods that you're eating, especially if you're noticing digestive issues or you're feeling, say after your lunch, you usually feel very tired, very sluggish, or you're getting migraines or headaches consistently. And the easiest way to do that is with a food diary or a food journal. And this isn't necessarily keeping track and counting calories of what you're eating. It's more important to think about what foods you're actually eating and ingesting than the calories that are in them when it comes to this food diary. And the reason behind that is because then when you do go to the doctor, you're not trying to piece together what you ate that day or how you felt exactly that day. You can have this diary that you take with you and you can show him or her, after I had lunch this day, I felt really bloated or I felt really exhausted. And then this food made me feel like this and that. And it really starts to piece together this puzzle for you. So I think anybody that's dealing with issues around foods or maybe inflammation or bloating or headaches or energy, that food diary can be a really key component for you. And it can be as simple as taking notes in your phone, as getting a little notebook that fits in your purse and keeping notes after you eat and how you feel. Or, I have a great template that I usually give to clients. It's a freebie that you can keep track, and it makes sure you remember, what you have before breakfast and after and lunch, and not only just right after you eat, because most sensitivities can show up 3 to 4 hours later and sometimes days later. So that can make it pretty difficult for the diagnosis. So keeping track of the foods is really important. And one thing that I do want to mention, because we're actually going through this process with my little girl. She has been gluten-free since she's been born and actually introduced to solid foods. And that's just because we have a totally gluten-free house, so we don't have to worry about cross-contamination or anything like that while we're at home. So we're starting to discuss with her doctor and her pediatrician how we're going to test her for this celiac gene, or if she has issues with gluten, because you actually have to be eating gluten to be diagnosed with celiac disease. So I love the idea of elimination diets, and I have an amazing program I walk women through that totally, it cuts out wheat, gluten, dairy, corn, soy, other main causes of food sensitivities and issues, and then we slowly reintroduce them. What you have to be careful with is if you do feel it may be gluten that's leading to celiac disease, you actually have to be eating gluten for about 3 to 4 weeks before they can test you to accurately get a diagnosis. So while it may be very tempting to just run out and eliminate gluten from your diet immediately, if there's symptoms that are lining up with that diagnosis, you might want to talk to your doctor first, because the last thing I like to see clients do is eliminate gluten and feel amazing, and then they talk with their doctor and they find out the only way to get the diagnosis is to start eating it again and feeling bad.
What are the biggest mistakes that women make with food and eating and the types of food that we eat, would you say?
Well, I think some of the biggest mistakes that we make is we're eating based on what other people are recommending. And that could be magazines that we read or commercials that we hear, or even, those claims that we see on food labels. And I think what it comes down to is we're all unique whenever it comes to our foods. We're different chemically, we all have different fingerprints, and our digestive systems all work a little bit differently in our bodies. So when it comes to foods, there's this idea of bio-individuality. And basically what that means is even if a food is, quote, healthy, it may not necessarily be healthy for you. So getting down to the root of what foods actually make you feel good, then you can focus on eating those. It'll give you more energy, more clarity. It'll make you feel better, and cutting out foods that don't serve you. So if you know that certain things trigger your headaches or your energy drains or feeling sluggish, then you can cut those out. So really being empowered when it comes to what you're eating is super important.
So what are some of your favorite foods you think that are healing foods?
I love berries. Like, the summer is my season because I am obsessed with all kinds of fruit, and I eat berries all day long, like strawberries, blueberries, blackberries, and raspberries, you name it. I usually have a bowl of mixed berries beside me at all times, or I'm throwing them in a smoothie, or, they're on top of something else I'm making, because for some reason, back to that bio-individuality, those just make me feel great. And looking back all through my childhood, that was my go-to, was fruit. Whenever I needed a snack, or I needed to feel better, or I just needed, that pick-me-up, it was always going back to fruit. And, for some people, fruit can make them feel a little bloated or tired because there's sugar in there, so it makes them crash. But for me, it was always about thriving with berries.
How do they uncover that proper diet for what they need? Because like you said, it's individual. It depends on a lot of things.
Well, the easiest way is to go through something like an elimination diet, where you're cutting out common allergies or common things that cause sensitivities or issues within your body. Like the top allergens are eggs and corn and wheat and soy and different grains, and even some people beans and onions or nightshades. So it's really, you want to cut out those common causes of inflammation or irritability or issues, and slowly start to add them back in. That doesn't necessarily get to the bottom of all of your food issues, because again, you could be somebody that totally thrives while eating an avocado, and then there could be the next person who that just makes them feel bloated and sluggish. You never quite know. So it's really about keeping track, so you can start with those common causes of issues, right? And then you can get a little bit deeper. So once you rule out those main triggers, start to play with your foods and keep track of how you're feeling after you eat them. If you notice, like, there's certain things that I eat that within 3 hours, you don't want to be in the same room with me, because they make me so irritable that I know that I have to avoid those or else. And then, there's certain foods that if I eat them, I know that I need to be like ready to go outside and do yard work, because I'm going to have so much energy and I'm going to feel great that I can't eat them right before bed, or else then I can't sleep. So it's really that discovery process. And it may feel a little overwhelming, but the best way to take this is make it really fun and introduce new recipes to you and your family while you're learning exactly what's making you feel good. You can take the guesswork out by doing different programs that are already structured for you, especially if you're super busy. Then you don't have to worry about kind of creating recipes that remove those common allergens. Then you can just go get your shopping list and start cooking whatever's on that meal plan. So that can make it really easy to figure it out, and just keeping track using that food journal.
You talked about a little bit about being mindful, kind of paying attention to what you're eating and how it makes you feel. I have some friends who've done the different diets, Whole30, for example, and they don't necessarily notice the change while they're doing it. They may feel, just because it's an adjustment, you have to kind of think about what foods you can eat and all that stuff. But then once the 30 days is over, then they go back to eating some of those foods and they're like, oh, I really see a difference. So is that kind of a common experience with your clients? How do people deal with that?
Absolutely. So once you remove that common trigger from your diet and then you reintroduce it, you can notice big changes. So at first, if you're just eating your normal lifestyle and it's normally in the foods that you're eating, it may not be as prominent and you might not notice it. But once you remove that ingredient or that food from your regular routine and it's been out of your diet for, say, that 30 days or even 2 weeks or so, and you reintroduce it, you are going to notice if it's going to cause you headaches or irritability or make you feel drained. You'll see those differences. And that's kind of the idea behind you go through these programs. The program is super important to help you feel great because you're going to get some real food nourishment. But the key part, which most people miss, is actually what you do afterwards, that second phase, that kind of hidden phase where you're adding foods back in. And that can be called like the reintroduction of foods. And that's where you start to notice the hidden triggers or the foods that are causing issues. So as you're finishing a program like that, I always suggest do it slowly. So don't just immediately run out and eat a cheeseburger if you've eliminated dairy and gluten and wheat and other things from your diet, because then you're not going to know if it's the cheese or the gluten or the wheat or any other ingredients that are in that burger, right? So it's really about focusing on the reintroduction so you can notice the difference. And it does take some commitment. It's not always the easiest because sometimes you get through that program and the whole 30 days you're just craving something, right? And you can't wait until day 31 that you just go chomp on this, whatever this food craving is. But if you are slow and you're patient with yourself and you're really mindful about how you reintroduce that food, that's where you're going to see the most benefit.
So Jenna, what are some ways that the listeners can use this information we've been talking about in their daily life?
When it comes down to it, you just have to be proactive. And as you're growing and you're learning more about yourself, you're going to become more empowered. And it's not just in the decisions that you're making with your foods, but often it starts to creep into the way that you're taking care of yourself, your family, your health care. When it comes to the gut, there's a quote that says all disease begins in the gut. And so when you're really introducing these real foods and these nourishing foods, and you're taking care of your gut, you're going to be feeling a lot better overall. And right now, whenever it comes to our healthcare system, which don't get me wrong, I think there's a time and a place for our healthcare system. And I might not be here today if it wasn't for it. My daughter might not be. But, there's things that definitely don't fit well with me. And one of the biggest things is right now, chronic disease is growing in our country and around the world. It's the rates of people being diagnosed with something chronic are just growing. And of course, our healthcare system is kind of that symptom focused, right? So they're focusing on what ailments you're dealing with and not necessarily what's the root cause of what's going on. So when it comes to empowering yourself with these foods and discovering what does make you feel good and make you feel like you're thrived and have all this energy and you can focus and clarity and really live that better lifestyle for yourself, you can actually get down to the root of what's going on and not just the symptoms. So I think that's really important when it comes to our daily life. And also for those of you listening out there with a family, this becomes really important for that next generation, right? And thinking about what our kids are seeing us do and what foods they're seeing us make and eat and serve at the dinner table. So then we can teach them how to eat these real foods instead of, turning to the drive-through or turning to those easy processed foods. They're going to have a better relationship with food in their future.
So who is the best suited, the best type of person to go through this change or to go through the process of an elimination diet or trying to find foods that are healing them?
Usually when clients come to me, it's because they've tried everything else. They have tried prescriptions. They've tried, this, they've tried that, and nothing seems to be working and getting rid of whatever's happening in their body, whether it's, the bloating, the digestive issues, the focus, the headaches, and they're looking for a solution. And it may be outside of that traditional healthcare. So if you're somebody that's in that position where you feel like you've tried everything, but you're still dealing with headaches or bloat or digestion issues, it may be time for you to look at that elimination diet. It may be time for you to turn to your foods to see if that could be the cause of what's causing your issues. I love working with women who, they're busy, they're active, they don't have time to be spending hours in the kitchen, because when I first started eating real foods, I was probably in the kitchen about 5 minutes a day before that, because I just did whatever was possible to get in and out as quickly as I could. And I know what it's like to be in that place. And now, I've got it down to a system where we can work together and figure out how fitting those real foods into your diet can work, even if you live on a busy schedule, whether it's using technology. Like, I love the crock pot. I'm such an avid fan of that. I haven't switched over to the Instapot yet, which I know people are going crazy for right now. But whether it's using tools like that to make your life easier, whether it's meal planning to take the guesswork out of going to the grocery store, just simple ways that you can incorporate these real foods into your diet.
And how do you think it's going to affect healthcare?
People are just getting smarter, and they're getting more interested in their own healthcare. They want to know how they're going to feel and what's going to make them feel better. It's no longer necessarily you go to the doctor, you have a 3-minute conversation with them, they prescribe something, and you're okay with it. People are asking questions. With all the documentaries that are out there today about our foods, with all the research that's coming out, with all the tools that are helping you monitor what's going on in your body, everything's changing because of that technology. Now there's actual in-home tests that you can do to test the amount of bacteria that's in your gut. There's in-home tests to find out food sensitivities. There's different things that you can do to be more proactive. And I think that's totally going to flip the healthcare system when we have these empowered people that are out there and they're interested in feeling better, and they're not okay with just taking another pill for it. They want a different option. They want to feel empowered. They want to know that they can create this revolution within themselves. And I think that trend is just going to continue. And it's only going to get bigger over the next few years as more and more information comes out about food and how that relates to your health and even your emotions and how you feel. And there's a growing trend for health coaches out there. So there's many more people that are becoming health coaches every day because of different experiences they've had by introducing real foods. And now they're sharing their stories. So that's just empowering the revolution even more.
So I know you talk some about nourishment and gratitude and how they work together. So can you talk a little bit about that?
I love to talk about gratitude and positivity. This is one of my genius zones, I like to call it. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Strengths Finder, where you can find out your top 5 strengths.
I am. I have that.
Oh, okay. So positivity is my top strength. I don't know if you can know that from what I do. And I started embracing this and incorporating it into the work that I'm doing with clients. And gratitude becomes super important with your food because it's super easy. We walk into the grocery store and you can buy avocados from Mexico in our stores in New York at any time in the year, right? Think about what they used to have to do back in the day whenever you only had access to the foods that were grown locally in those seasons. You couldn't just make anything that you wanted. So today we have so much access to the foods. And I think that makes us miss the importance and the work that goes into actually growing and harvesting these foods that are nourishing us. So even in New York, I always had this little garden that at one point I had a garden on top of a garage roof because I just wanted to grow some of my foods. And it was just herbs and easy things to grow at that point. And now it's morphed into, these raised bed gardens that are all through my yard. And having that touch in the soil with the dirt and seeing how the plants are growing and thriving and changing and teaching my little ones about that, it instills that gratitude for the foods that we're eating. And you don't have to go out and start your own garden or dive into a community garden or anything like that to experience this gratitude. But it can be as simple as actually thinking about the foods that you're eating while you're eating them. And like you said before about being a means to an end, to reshape that view on foods and actually think about what you're chewing. And I know my husband, it sounds crazy, but like when we first started dating, he would be done with his meal within 3 minutes of it being put in front of him because he would just chow down and eat everything so fast and not even realize what he was really eating, right? It was just gone. I think that goes back to a lot of, his military background where they didn't have time to eat, right? That was just the quickest part of your day and you got in and you got out as fast as you could. And now it's more about realizing, what's on your plate, how it tastes, how it feels when you're chewing it, how you're digesting it, and just being more mindful about what's on your plate becomes really important. And when you start to practice this, especially if you have any kind of you disconnect with foods, whether it's feelings of overeating or anxiety around foods or eating or just being somebody that is known to be a snacker or overeater, when you actually start to think about the foods that you're eating and process them more slowly, it can help you realize what they're doing for your body and to curb those behaviors. So it really becomes important to just express some gratitude. And while, we don't necessarily say grace before meals or have any kind of, religious preference around our meals, even just taking a second to note how delicious your dinner was, or how much your little one loved that asparagus, or how much your husband complimented you on that meal you just cooked. Having gratitude around that can make a big difference in your growth and in that desire to keep eating real foods.
That was lovely. It's really funny because when you mentioned your husband eating really fast, I just thought of the military because when I was in the Army, that's how kind of life was. You quickly ate your food and didn't think about it. But I've started doing a little bit of the gratitude with the meals and just, saying I'm thankful for all that the earth has given me and thankful to have such a plentiful supply of food. And it really does make you slow down and just savor those bites. I had an aunt who chewed her food probably 40 times before she swallowed. And it took so long to eat with her. And I remember as a little kid, it was awful. But now I remember that and I'm like, she was really, really enjoying that food.
Yeah, and I've heard that too, where people say to chew your food between 40 to 100 times before you actually swallow, which, I'm not in that place yet because I am still a busy mama, but I know how much more that can make you pay attention to the foods and help you digest them better.
Well, and I think it also adds to satiety because it gives that hormone release from your stomach the opportunity to happen and everything. But it's just funny because that was 30 years ago and she had been doing that all her life. So she probably had great gut health. So can you tell me your favorite foods to eat? You already said some about berries, but do you have any other favorite foods?
I love making guacamole. That is one of my favorite foods to have. And I've always been a snacker. So one of my biggest downfalls is like, I love chips, like salty chips. They were always my favorite. And guacamole was like the perfect fit, especially those yummy, crunchy tortilla chips. And so now I've actually replaced what I snack on the guacamole with. And I mix it up between like cucumbers or carrots, and I've done celery or jicama, and making it a little more healthy by cutting out those tortilla chips. That can be a super simple change for most people. I do a lot of cooking with essential oils. And so for my guacamole now, as much as I love growing my own herbs, it's not always easy or convenient, right, to chop up a ton of cilantro. So I actually use cilantro oil and lime essential oils to make my guacamole. So you're getting potent benefits of those oils in your foods. And you don't have that big mess to clean up with, cutting and juicing the lime too, and cutting all the herbs. So I love guacamole. We're big hosters. So we love to have people over and entertain. And so making fun little appetizers is kind of my genius zone too. So I love putting out fun snacks and dips and little treats that are kind of unexpected. So our go-to was usually like cheese platters and meat platters and all this stuff. And over the years, I've kind of morphed into, the healthier treats, like the guacamole with the different veggies as the options, or bacon wrapped dates. Like those are my to die for. And they're sugary and sweet and delicious, but still semi-healthy for you, right? Of course, we love putting out some cheese platters every once in a while. It's just that's one of the foods I have to be careful with because it can cause a lot of congestion for me. So I just have to be very cautious about avoiding that platter or else I'll eat the whole thing. Really, those fun, almost entertaining foods are some of my favorites.
Well, Jenna, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. I know my listeners have learned a lot about celiac, different types of foods that you can eat and how they affect your body. So I really appreciate you coming on the show. If listeners want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Mathea, I'm so excited I was able to join you and share this message with your listeners. If you're interested in learning more, there's a couple different places you can connect with me. I do host a podcast. It's called Gratitude and Grace. You can find that on iTunes. So if you're somebody that really fits with that message of positivity, definitely jump over it and have a listen. I mentioned a food diary a few times throughout this podcast. So if you want a free template, you can go to Jenna Drew.com/food diary. And on that website, you'll find a lot of health and wellness tips, as well as just another way to look at your overall wellness. And I do share my new journey into homesteading and motherhood at lifedefinedbygrace.com. So you'll see some ideas for self-care over there, gardening tips. So I'd love to connect with you and help you on this path to wellness.
I noticed you had a lot of smoothie recipes on Jenna Drew.com.
Oh yeah, there's actually I'm obsessed with smoothie bowls now too. So I started with smoothies and then it slowly morphed into the smoothie bowls, where you can decorate them all amazing. And so I've got 7 amazing smoothie bowl recipes on there that you can download that are all super yummy. Of course, you can pick and choose your toppings, but I provide recommendations on there too. So you'll find some of those amazing recipes as well.
Great. So, well, guys, this has been another great episode of the Nutrition Experts Podcast, the podcast that is all about learning more so you can do more with nutrition in your life.
You've just listened to an episode of the Nutrition Experts Podcast. Be sure to get more information about this week's episode at www.nutritionexpertspodcast.com. Tune in next time for another great conversation with a nutrition expert and expand your personal knowledge in the field of nutrition, one conversation at a time.